to move on, because one of the things that we've discovered as part of the
Mm.
Doge exercise, and it has not been publicised yet, but I think it was probably going to be publicised from the beginning of next week, is the carbon capture and storage project, which is going on, which affects not just the world, but the whole of the northwest of England.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Just to explain, I've got a background in chemistry. I've got a master's degree in chemistry. I work in industry that's in IT. So when somebody shared with me the details of what's happened, I started to look at it and question it. Effectively, the idea is this: they're going to take waste CO2 emissions from all sorts of industries. This is the brainchild. They're going to pump that into the gas field that is below the Irish Sea in the Liverpool Bay area. And the idea is that that is an efficient way to get rid of this CO2. For me, there's major problems with the chemistry of this. There's major problems with the contract. The people who we have the contract with to do this, the government have the contract with, are the ones that polluted doing the same thing, and that's on record. So
and they're the ones who also extracted the gas from the North Sea in the first place.
Yes, they are. Now, so the field itself is about 1 billion square meters. So there's a lot of space, and it's not whole effectively, it's porous materials that they're going to pump gas into, a bit like a sponge. I think that's the easiest way to say it. The idea is you pump the gas into it, the sponge fills. The problem is when you start to look at what it is they're pumping in, it's not pure CO2. This is waste product CO2. There's no legislation around what should be in that waste. So it's industrial waste, and it will carry toxic chemicals with it, and they are atomized. Because again, I looked at this to say, well, can they do that? There's industry standard levels of what that waste can be, but those levels are quite frightening. Effectively, and I'll cut to the chase, one of the things it does is it creates atomized sulfuric acid in the chambers. That's very simply can demonstrate that, the chemistry of it. That will erode away those chambers. The other problem for that is this field is not going to go away in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. So what happens when this corrosive material keeps eroding away at the seals of this thing? What happens in 50 years' time? The other thing is this corrosive material will mobilize toxic chemicals. So if there's any deposits of mercury, and you say, there'll be tiny amounts of mercury, 1 part per million mercury will do you an enormous amount of damage. If that field gets down to the water table, we're in real problems, or our children or our grandchildren are, because 1, how do you undo it? 2, how do you know it's that? And 3, the other problem is what happens if it leaks on the surface? There's seismic problems on this field. These are all. This is a matter of record, so I'm not making this up. You can go and find this. So what happens if it bursts through? We get poison we get deoxidization of the sea. So what's our Irish government going to think of that? We're poisoning them. What's everyone on the northwest coast that's in line of this? What happens if you wake up with CO2 in the atmosphere at a high level? Because we all know that CO2 kills people silently.
Mm.
So is it not going to kill our fish in an area that's a significant site of interest? So this is all protected bay. To me, this is complete madness, because there doesn't appear to be the due diligence and the controls in place. There doesn't appear to be a sense of what ifs. There's no risk assessments I've seen that safeguard this in 50 years' time. That's what's worrying me.
And the point is, this is all absolutely cutting edge, brand new technology they're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah,
so there are no things in place to stop it, really.
No.
And not only that, but it's been done, to my mind, as a matter of secrecy. Because
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet 3 weeks ago you didn't know about this, did you?
No, no, and they're supposed to. Surely every single council should know about it, and surely if they did know about it, they'd be saying, "Hang on, what is this?" You know?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
they jump up and down about the possibility of some newts being harmed on Hoylake Beach, but I
exactly.
mean, I wanted to question you about what the downsides are. Now, we've, as I say, this technology has been tried various places around the world. It's almost never worked.
Yeah, yeah,
There's been accidents and they've stopped doing it almost everywhere. In Australia, in Algeria.
yeah,
They actually found that the ground was changing because they'd high pressure CO2 that they injected into it.
yeah,
And so there was the other thing is that in order to get the carbon dioxide to the sea, they've got to put it through pipelines. And there have been various accidents around the world where carbon CO2 pipelines have ruptured and
yeah,
caused gas escape and serious harm.
yeah, yeah. The Algerian one, they overpressured the pipe,
Mm.
and that released it. So yeah, the in Canada they had the same problem. They had the pipes leaking, and that created acidic water. So
Mm.
yeah, because the thing is as well, if it leaks, you're not. You've got to remember this is something that's going to happen over 20 years. So the little pollution may not be noticed, but over a 20-year build-up, if you keep throwing things out the window, eventually you're going to have a problem. But tomorrow, if you throw out your window, you're going to one bit of rubbish, you might not think much of it. Well, we
Mm.
know in the sea that we now have a problem with plastics. Well, the same principle is true here. If they've got leaks over 20 years and you're pushing stuff in, it's gonna damage our environment
Well, this
significantly.
is what I can't. This is what I can't understand. You talk about the plastics and so on, which they make a huge mountain out of.
Yeah,
Talk about fracking. Fracking, whereby you're pumping water and
right.
chemicals into the to release the gas from the shale. Now that you can't do that because it's too dangerous. It can cause earthquakes. But pumping compressed CO2 into unknown geology under the sea, that's all safe, is it?
Well, it's even funnier because what they do when they pump the gas out, they refill it with brine because you can't leave a hole, right?
Yeah.
So when they're going to pump the CO2 in, they're going to have to push that
There's
brine
the
out.
brine going.
So where's that going? And that will carry all the pollutants that are in the field. So what are they going to do with that? Where are they going to go with that? So there's a ton of questions we need to ask, and there's a ton
But
of
how have they got all this
concerns.
past all the regulate, Natural England and all the usual people, environmental groups and organisations who are supposed to be in place to stop this sort of stuff? How have they got it all past them?
I don't know is the honest answer because I don't know whether they're aware of it. Really,
They must be.
I agree, but again, for me, I've only just become aware of it the last few weeks,
Mm.
so I'm starting to ask questions to say, well, who knows about this? Please step forward and give us your account as to why you think this is a good idea. Uh, and literally asking people, I'm starting. I know as Reform, we're gonna make a local release of information about this, and then at that point, we want to start to ask
Mm.
the different bodies that are accountable for making this a good decision, how they have risk assessed this, how they have decided that this is okay. It's all right for you maybe sitting in London signing it off, but I live here.
Yeah, but
My
we know
children
we
live
know
here.
the answer to that, Mark. It's been done because of ideology. It's
Yes,
been
exactly.
done because of the fear of climate change, and ideologically, this is a thing that might stop it, and that's
Yeah,
and that's why it's been done, and that's why it's forced through. That's why it's been done in secret. But when you actually begin to analyse the risks, not just from leaking pipelines and so on, but I wanted to ask you more about you talked about the risk of these hazardous chemicals getting into the water table, and I
yeah.
understand that. What about though the if there is seismic activity, is there a possibility that the cap rock, which is the layer which keeps all the sponge underneath, if you like, if that fractures, what happens then?
Well, they actually in the, and again, I've only touched the surface and scratching on this really, but there is in the seismic assessments. Let's just put it into context. For the last 20 years, they've drilled into this, and that always has seismic problems. And now they're going to put super compressed material back into it that's going to push up against.
And how they, that just again to my ignorance, but they bored a hole down to get the gas out in the first place. What did they do with the hole? Did they cap that in some way? Or?
Yeah, that I don't know enough about this. That's the bit I'm really learning. I'm on a steep learning curve. But my understanding is they cap it at the end. They fill it with brine and they cap it. And that was where I'm talking about the chemistry. The acid is my problem, because over 20 years, that corrosion, to me, would worry me that cap is going to stay in place. I mean, okay, it's tight. And let me put that into practicalities. It's a big space. I did some metric calculations on this, and the equivalent amount of sulfuric acid, and that's just one of the products that is going to be potentially generated. And let me qualify that. Potentially generated in 20 years. It's 35,000 trucks. You know the trucks you see, the fuel trucks. It's about 35,000 fuel trucks worth of sulfuric acid that would be generated, and that's just one product. And so for me, and okay, that's over 20 years, but are you seriously telling me that's not going to have an effect? And that's what I'm saying.
Would that erode the rock from below?
Yeah, it would do a few things. It would block the porous material. So remember, we talked about this being like a sponge.
Yeah.
That acid effectively will block it, will block the holes because it will close them off. So that means it becomes inefficient. And then so effectively you could be compressing the gas even more because it can't move. It hasn't got the space.
No.
What happens when you keep compressing gas? It eventually explodes.
Yeah.
Or it finds the weakest point in the chamber it's in, and it
comes
escapes.
out. Yeah, I mean that's the bit that really terrifies me, because to be honest, if that were to happen and you suddenly had a CO2 explosion out in the Irish Sea, that's almost an extinction level event, isn't it?
Yeah. And as I said, 1 billion cubic meters of space. It's very difficult to understand that, but that's what the research says. That's how much volume of space. And you pump and you fill that with CO2. That's an awful lot of CO2. It's going to come.
It's the more. I don't think anybody's done more than that in any project.
No, they haven't.
Worldwide.
No, they haven't done.
So it's completely. This is all completely cutting edge, and we're the experiment.
Yeah, we are the chemistry experiment, and that's what worries me, because we're then the environmental experiment when the disaster occurs, and we're the people that have to live with the damage of that. Because as I said when I started, and this is what worries me, is what happens in 50 years? That CO2 is still there. What happens in 100 years when it all starts to break down potentially? Where's it going to go? It can only go upwards. I know it sits. It doesn't rise very much CO2, but it'll sit on the seabed, and it will be poisoning the marine life on that seabed if it leaks out. So for me, this is too big a risk. When we put uranium waste products, we seal it in contract. We have it monitored. It's controlled. It's
easier. I mean, that's a block of glass, isn't it? Which is radioactive, but it's a block of glass which is relatively easy to deal with. What we're talking about here is thousands of barrels of fluid.
Millions of barrels.
Sorry,
millions. But that's the point, and that's where I'm really worried. Is because when the contract finishes, those guys will pack up and they'll go away. And then it becomes a government problem.
Yeah.
when it leaks
Yeah.
in 100 years or in 50 years time. And then it's, and this is where I think, hang on, guys, are you really sure this is a really good way of saving the world, that you're actually creating a problem which isn't going to be for our generation, but for the next?
It's the worry whenever you have private companies interfacing with bureaucracy like this. It's always the worry that this corruption has happened somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a theory that this Italian company the Italian chemical company who were responsible for getting the gas out in the first place, could see this as a very cheap and easy way of getting out of the project altogether, because they don't have to do anything except in fact, and the other worry is that all the pipes which are going to be taking the CO2 back to the field are all repurposed gas pipes. Now, you shouldn't be putting CO2 in repurposed gas pipes because they're not appropriate.
And normally with these contracts, with any sort of oil gas contract, the stipulation is, the license is that once you've finished, you return the environment to a good state.
As it was, yeah. So now they don't have to.
Well, they're being paid to do it. Because
£2 billion.
Yeah, they're being paid this amount of money to return it and get rid of this waste. It's nuts. Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, our agenda, I think, is for to try and publicise this story as much as we can over the next few weeks, because I suspect that when people start to understand it now, this means that we have to explain it to them in a way that is explicable and that they will understand. But if we can do that, then I think we've got to try and stop this, haven't we?
Yeah. Well, I am very keen that we stop this, because it is worrying me as a grandfather and I'm really serious. It's not so much for me, because I think in the next 10 years they'll get it sorted, but it's my children's children are the ones that will live with the mess. And that for me is a worrying thing. Is I think we need to really be adults, as we said before, about this and say, hang on, let's park the ideology, let's look again at the facts and the science, and let's not take the facts and the science from the business that's been paid for it, because they're marking their own homework there. Let's ask people that are skeptical, who know what they're talking about, to look at it really, really hard, and ask the government bodies that said, oh yeah, this is okay, to go really, really hard. Did you really do an assessment here of the risks? Did you really understand what it is you're signing up to? And have you got mitigated plans should there be a problem? Because what will happen otherwise is, when the problem occurs, everyone will run around like headless chickens, and while the damage continues to be done until they work out what on earth they're going to do to unpick it. And they need to be doing that now. And that for me is the worry. And so for me, it's like, just stop it. Stop it.
They're starting to do construction next year, aren't they?
I know.
So if we're going to stop it, we'll have to be pretty quick, because it's autumn next year. I think they're doing it all.
Well, my view is, just because it started doesn't mean you can't say no. And I think, and if the government have signed a stupid contract where they can't get out of it, so be it. I'd rather they lose £2 billion than we kill potentially a sea or people, or we create an environmental disaster that will happen at some point in the next 100 years, potentially, that will be twice as, 10 times the catastrophic disaster that we've seen before. This is a time bomb for me. So, yeah, I think even though they start, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. My view is we keep campaigning to stop it regardless.
I agree entirely. Look, Mark, that's been fantastic. Thanks very much indeed. I don't know how much of this we'll be able to put out immediately. We may be embargoed by He Who Must Be Obeyed, but we'll put out what we can, I think, because I do think it's such a powerful story. We have to get it out into the open.
Yeah.
But thanks very much for being on.
No problem.